Okay, I think we can start. So this lecture was about an introduction to contextual word embeddings. Um, yeah, and in this lecture, he goes through these things. So first is a discussion on the earlier word representations, which did not take context into account, and then how things changed around with uh, Elmo and Tag LM, which came before Elmo, and then ULM Fit by Jeremy Howard and Sebastian Ruder, and then he talks briefly about attention and transformer architectures. So the next lecture is primarily about attention, about just attention and transformers. So this lecture will be just briefly going through them, and he ends up with BERT, how BERT has kind of revolutionized things in NLP. Okay. So the earlier word representations, the main concept is that each word, yeah. So the earlier representations had algorithms like word to vec, glove, fast text. We have gone through both of these. I think fast text we did not go in detail. I think in this lecture series. Yeah. So word to vec is when you try to predict a center word given context words. Like there are two ways of doing that. There's SIBO and there's one more, I forget the name. And glove is when you create many samples, like this word and this word appeared in context, and then you have positive samples and negative samples, and then you train word embeddings based on that. And fast text was an improvement on both of them with some extra features. I think fast text has good support for misspelled words and unknown words, I think. So these were the earlier word representations. And so word vectors were the first time, I mean, with the introduction of the word vectors, people realized, or people understood how to use neural nets in NLP. So with uh, with just a supervised neural net, that is without using word embeddings, neural net did not give a really good performance. So as you can see in the NER task, a simple neural net without using pre-trained word embeddings gave a poor performance, an F1 of 81. So apparently POS, okay, someone's breathing out really loudly. Please mute yourself if you don't have questions. Okay. Part of speech tagging is apparently an easy task. So it's not a good judge of how good your model is or the improvement that it can give. NER is a slightly more tougher task apparently. So if you can see, the neural net without word embeddings does not give a good performance. Whereas when they started using unsupervised pre-training followed by supervised NN. So what this is basically is, unsupervised pre-training is your word embedding calculation. That's what unsupervised pre-training implies. So you just have a bunch of English text, maybe Wikipedia or Google News or uh, some similar corpuses, and then you do an unsupervised pre-training to get good word embeddings, and then you use those pre-trained word embeddings to as features to your neural net, and that gave a huge jump to their scores, which is evident in the NER scores. It jumped to 88. And then you had a bunch of handcrafted features. It gives that extra edge. It gave a small jump again. So these handcrafted features are something like character suffixes for POS. I guess that's something like ing or yeah, some small suffixes like that. And I have no idea what a gazetteer is. That's something, some extra feature for NER. Yeah. So word vectors were helped us to use neural nets for NLP. Those were the early days. And yeah, so suppose you have a task and you have a bunch of text, like a tweet classification or document classification. You can just have random vectors and train them on just our task. Like, even if you don't do pre-trained word embeddings, you can just train word embeddings on just the text of our task. But most cases, use of pre-trained word vectors helps, because we train them on much more words and on much more data. So if it sees huge amount of data, like the Wikipedia corpus that I mentioned, uh, the word embeddings would obviously be better than if you just train it on the text of the task we have at hand. So that's what's shown in this graph. Pre-trained word embeddings are always better than if you start from random and train it in all cases. Okay. Please interrupt me if you have any questions. So these are some tips for unknown word vectors. So I think the earlier way was to just use Ankh. If you encounter an unknown word, that a word that's not in your vocabulary. So what the main issue with this is that all unknown words would collapse into the same single embedding. So there's no way to distinguish between different unknown words, either for identity or meaning. So this is obviously not an ideal way of representing words that are not in our vocabulary. So one solution is to use char level models. So characters are always in your vocabulary. You just have 26 letters in the alphabet. So you can always build a character level model to encode your unknown words. That's one of the solutions. Yeah, I think having to deal with unknown words is especially important in tasks like question answering, where it is important to match on word identity even for words outside your word vector vocabulary. That sounds important, but I'm not able to understand it fully. Okay, it's important to match on word. Yeah.
So I think that's saying, like, if you've got a proper noun or something that's not in your vocabulary,
Right.
that you can identify that as part of the answer just based on its position.
Got it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So yeah, as you said, now proper nouns are really important in question answering, since the questions might be dealing with the actual nouns. So these are some extra tips. Yeah. So this tip is, what it says is, every time you see an unknown word, if Ankh word at test time appears in your unsupervised. If the Ankh word at test time appears in your unsupervised word. Okay, I think what it says is, if the unknown word that you see at test time, if you have seen it earlier, if that word is present in your earlier unsupervised corpus, then you can calculate the vector for that unknown word and just use that vector at test time. Yeah, I think that's what it means here. So that's one of the ways. Another way is to assign a random vector every time you see an unknown word and just add them to your vocabulary. So this is good because it's better than just having a single Ankh token and having a single representation for all Ankh words. So when you have random vectors for each unknown word, that still helps you distinguish between them. A definitely helps a lot. B may help a little more. Okay. Another thing, you can try collapsing things to word classes, like unknown number, capitalized things, and having an unclass for each. Okay. Yeah. So each word class can have its own unc token. So all unknown words belonging to a certain class will have an unknown token. Unknown will have a word embedding of its own. But he doesn't talk about how good that is. Maybe it's not as good as these two. Okay.
So Gautam, I didn't quite understand 2A. If the unc word at test time appears in your unsupervised word embeddings, use that vector as is at test time. Well, if you have an unknown word, if you're trying to do a language model and you have an unknown word, what does it mean appears in your unsupervised word embeddings? I don't understand what that
Okay.
means.
Let me try to answer that. So I think, so every time you see a huge corpus, the first task is to decide a vocabulary, right? You may choose the most popular 1,000 words, and that becomes your vocabulary, and you just train word embeddings on these 1,000 words. And suppose you see a new word in your test data which happens to be in your unsupervised corpus but is not among the 1,000 words, then this part is the confusing thing for me. Then I think he says calculate a vector for that unknown word now and then use it. I don't know if this is right, but that's what I got from this.
Is he talking about here, like if your model has fine-tuned word embeddings, where you're fine-tuning just a subset of your unsupervised word embeddings, and then it's okay to use an unfine-tuned word embedding?
Oh,
Oh, that makes sense.
yeah, that makes more sense. But if the word is in your vocab, why wouldn't you just fine tune it?
It may not appear in your training set. There's no way to fine-tune a word that's not in your
I mean,
training
if
set.
it's not there in your training set, then you don't have an embedding, right?
Well, but if you're training on a small corpus, but you're starting with word embeddings from, say, glove, then you may fine tune a subset of the
You don't
glove
train. I think the concept is that
vectors.
you pre-train on a huge corpus, right? Why would you train on a small corpus? You
I think
pre-train on a
For a
huge
specific
corpus.
task,
yeah.
like for the
I
question
think
answering
That's
task.
that is what fine tuning is, right?
Hmm.
yeah. So what I also had like a problem with it, but I think what's happening is people were not fine tuning till recently. Basically, you had two approaches. You either like use pre-trained vectors, or you just like use the same structure of the network, but you train completely from scratch. And I think that's what they mean is like you when you like do your own training and you don't have that word, then go to like somebody else's model of like the same structure and get vectors from there, and that should be sort of good. And then if you don't have that, then you do random.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you pre-train on, as Gautam said, you pre-train on a huge corpus, and so you have these pre-trained word embeddings, and now you're applying to a specific task where your training set maybe doesn't include, so you're fine-tuning on the words in your training set, but
I don't think there's fine tuning, because if you're fine
yeah.
tuning, you kept all the previous words. But
Ah,
basically before fine tuning, before like 2 years ago, people were not fine tuning. People were like training from scratch.
so if you're training from scratch and you have already a huge, you already have there's pre-trained word vectors from some huge corpus. Why would you want to train from scratch if you could just import the pre-tuned?
I think because systems were not set up to fine tune. So you could either like reuse like what was tuned on what was trained on like a you know, Google News or like some other, or Wikipedia or other big corpus, or you could take your own documents and basically train your own.
Okay.
So here he's saying that if you want to train your own word vectors and you have an unknown word, and you come across a whole bunch of words that are unknown that you can't.
Actually, Gautam, if you go to quickly search for that paper,
Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Are you?
Your voice is not clear, Srinivas.
Is it better now?
Not better.
It's grainy and.
He's going to come back in, I think. Oh, maybe he's not.
Okay, I think, shall we move on for now?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, we can get back to that later if we have time. So up till now we have had just one representation of words. So that is the main disadvantage of these word embeddings. So yeah, the same word might have different senses, like bank has two meanings, but what happens is both senses of the word collapse into a single vector because it is trained on sentences where bank is used in both meanings, and but only a single vector is trained for the word bank, for the string bank. So both meanings get collapsed into a single vector, which is the main issue with these type of word embeddings. And it's not just it's not just the semantics or the meanings, it's also syntactic behavior, register, connotations. I think he gives some good examples of this. So a word's connotations and stuff depends on its context. Like the same word with the same meaning might have different connotations. All of these things get lost when you use these pre-trained word vectors. Syntactic behavior is another thing. Yeah, in the lecture he gives some good examples for this. So the concept is that it's not just semantics, it's a bunch of other things that get lost when you use these pre-trained word embeddings as opposed to one that looks at context. Okay. Yep, so that's the main disadvantage of the traditional word embeddings. So we have to look at context. And what he says is that we had a solution to this problem all along. So if you look at a traditional LSTM language model that is trained from left to right, you feed in word embeddings from the bottom, from here, which are which could be your word2vec embeddings or glove, whatever. And now these hidden states, so these hidden states in an LSTM are basically states that get updated every time it sees a new word, and then you use that hidden state to predict the next word as it has seen all the previous words. So in a way, this hidden state is a contextual representation of the current word. So H2 is a contextual representation of E2 because H2 is just the hidden state that gets updated. So H1 has seen E1, and now when this hidden state gets updated when it sees E2, I mean, yeah. So each hidden state is basically the state of the LSTM that gets updated as it sees more and more words. So what he claims is that the hidden state is a contextual representation of the words. So we could just use the hidden states. So we had a solution to this problem all along. Yeah, but those language models are producing context-specific word representations at each position. Yep.
So if we've got a multi-layer LSTM,
Mm-hmm.
are any of those layers hidden states?
Yes.
Basically
Yes.
contextual word embeddings, and the higher you go, the more abstract the embedding is going to be?
Yep. All of them are kind of contextual embeddings of the words, but they kind of represent different things in the linguistic sense. Like the upper ones might be, yeah, I mean, my expertise is not that good in this, but yeah, all of them are contextual embeddings. Yep. And so this was the first model that made use of this. It's called Tag LM. It came before Elmo. Idea what meaning of word in context or standardly learned. Task RNN on small task level data. Why don't we use? Okay, so suppose you have a task at hand like NER. What this tag LM proposes is you have your word embedding model, which is your traditional word-to-vec fast text, and you train an RNN language model, and for each word you take the hidden state of that word and the word embedding of that word, and you concatenate them, and that is used as a feature to do the sequence tagging, the NER, whether it's a location, beginning of a location, ending of a location, and the different types of named entities. This diagram explains it slightly better. So the sentence is New York is located, and and so there is a, so even this part is slightly complex. So there is a char CNN RNN which has a representation, and then you have your so this is a character level model which gives a representation for the word new, and then there's a token embedding for the word new. You concatenate them, and there is a LSTM there, and then parallel to that okay, this is not exactly parallel, this is pre-trained. So on the corpus that you have, sorry, it's not on the corpus that you have. So there is a English language model that's already trained. It's pre-trained it's a pre-trained language model which is forward and backward. So you take the same sentence and you feed it to this language model. So the hidden state at each word, at each time step, or at each word word step is a contextual embedding for that word. But the catch here is that the forward language model has only seen words before it. So it's a context by taking only the words that came before it, and the backward language model is a context that takes words that come after it. So you concatenate both of them, the forward and backward. This is just a hacky way of doing things. And then you concatenate that whole thing with the hidden state that we got from here. So now you have a representation of the word that we got from a character level model and a word to vec embedding or a glove embedding, and then you concatenate with it with the language model hidden state. So yeah, we have this huge hidden state representation for each word, and then you have a bidirectional LSTM on RNN on top of that, and a softmax to predict what each word is. So it's a sequence tagging. So each word could be at the beginning of a location, the end of a location, or some other type of entities. Yeah, so that's how tag LM was made. So as you can see, the main concept is that they use contextual embeddings of words along with the pre-trained word vectors. And here they used separate contextual embeddings for forward and backward, and they concatenated them both, and they concatenated that whole thing to your pre-trained word vectors and use that for sequence tagging. So this is a description of the NER. I assume all of you know that. So the types of entities are person, date, location, organization. Okay, so this model gave a tiny jump from the previous state of the art at that time. Yep, I think there's nothing else here. And yeah, so as I said before, the language model is pre-trained on a huge corpus earlier. And then you just feed it the sentence that you have currently, and then you extract the hidden states. So this language model was trained on 800 million training words of billion word benchmark. And a language model trained on supervised data does not help. So if you just train the language model on the small amount of data that you have, that does not help. That's what the observation made by them. I assume it's because the data is probably not large enough to get a good language model. Having a bidirectional language model helps over only forward by about 0.2, which is expected. Having a huge language model design helps over a smaller language model by about 0.3. So I assume they increased the number of layers here. So having a bigger language model helps. Task specific. Okay, so using just the language model embeddings to predict doesn't give you good scores. We also use the pre-trained word vectors as well, along with the language model embeddings. Okay. So this is another model which he does not discuss in the lecture, so I did not go through it as well. Yep, I have no idea what it does. And then came Elmo embeddings from language models. Breakout version of word token vectors or contextual word vectors. Learn word token vectors using long contexts, not context windows. Here, a whole sentence could be longer. Learn a deep by NLM and use all its layers in prediction. Yeah. So this is pretty similar to tag LM. There are just a bunch of small differences. It uses all of the layers of the hidden state in the prediction. And I think tag LM uses just the final layer. Train a bidirectional language model. Aim at a performant but not overly large model. Okay, he uses two by LSTM layers. Use character CNN to build initial word representation only. Get Karen gram filters, 2 highway layers. Okay, the hidden state and the cell state dimensions are 4096 with 512 time predictions to the next input. Okay. So I think there is a linear layer maybe which reduces 4096 to 512. User residual connection, type parameters of token input. It also uses weight tying, I think, but he does not explain about that. Type parameters of token input and output and tie these between forward and backward LMs. Okay. So Elmo is task specific. Elmo learns task specific combination of by language model representation. This is an innovation that improves on just using top layer of LSTM task. So the earlier tag LM model just used the final layer representations, sorry, the final hidden state representation as the contextual embeddings, whereas Elmo uses both, and we'll see how exactly it does that. So this is the formula for the hidden states that we take out of the Elmo's language model. So there's a hidden state for each word, and I think K represents the word and J represents the layer. Okay, and what he says is that each layer is good at certain tasks. So this is what Dan was referring to earlier. All of them are contextual embeddings, but each hidden layer is good at certain types of tasks. So maybe the first layer is slightly good at NER and second one is good at POS. I'm just making stuff up now, but each hidden layer is good at certain types of NLP tasks. So that becomes a learnable parameter here. Sj is for this task, how much importance should I give to layer J? So J moves from 0 to L. L is the number of layers in your language model. Yes, I think that makes this part clear. And then this gamma task is just overall usefulness of Elmo to task. So if you remember the diagram that we saw earlier, this Elmo embeddings is just an additional feature that is concatenated to whatever base model we have, right? This is just an additional feature. So how much importance should I give to this Elmo contextual embedding? That is gamma, and even that depends on the task. So gamma task scales overall usefulness of Elmo to task. So I think all of these are learned parameters. Yeah, but I would assume they can just find out good values that work every time. Like, I don't think gamma task would change every time. I mean, when different persons run it on tasks that they have, I mean, intuitively it should be constant, but I think they are trained as well. Yeah, I hope that was clear. Elmo is the task. Yep, this is the steps in Elmo. First, run by language model to get representations of each word. So this is how you would get the representation. Then let whatever end task model use them. Freeze weights of Elmo for purposes of supervised model. Concatenate Elmo weights into task specific model. Details. Yep. So it's very similar to the tag LM model. You train Elmo on a huge amount of task, and then you freeze the Elmo model, and now you just use it as a feature provider. You just give it the sentence that you have now, get the features and concatenate the features with your baseline model features, and your model now just improves. Yep. And it's, as I said, it's task dependent. Concatenating into the intermediate layer as for tag LM is typical. This is what we saw in the picture, the earlier diagram. Can provide Elmo representations again when producing outputs as in a question answering system. So you can use the Elmo representations again, you can append it again at the output layer. I think it's useful for question answering systems. So this is the same picture, and instead of the tag LM, the Elmo representation is appended to your model, to the hidden state of intermediate state of your model. Elmo used in a sequence tagger. It gave a small jump in the NER task. Yep, it's not a really huge jump, but the main power of Elmo is that it is really useful in all. Great, it's great for all tasks. So this table just shows the power of Elmo. So you have all of these tasks, and these were the scores for the state of the art at that time. So what the people at Elmo, I think it was made by AI2, Allen Institute of Artificial Intelligence. So what they did was they implemented that baseline. They tried to implement that same models, and this was the baseline, the score that they got, and they just added Elmo features to that baseline, and the score just immediately jumped. So 81.1 was the baseline score they got, and they just added Elmo features on top of that. They just appended Elmo features to the intermediate state, and the score just jumped to 85.8. So as you can see, this table indicates the usefulness of Elmo for all kinds of tasks: squad, natural language inference, co-reference resolution, NER. I think this is text classification task. Okay. Weighting of layers. Yep, this is important. The two BiLSTM layers have differentiated uses or meanings. Lower layer is better for lower level syntax. So both of them are contextual embeddings, but what they represent is different. Lower layer is better for lower level syntax, like part of speech tagging, syntactic dependencies, NER. So these are the things that are important for each word, or the dependency between words and NER. So these are these are the concepts that are relative to each, important to each word, and the dependencies between words. Whereas the higher layer is better for higher level semantics. When you're looking at the sentence as a whole, when you're trying to get the sentiment, semantic role labeling, question answering, SNLI. Yeah, I think this makes sense as well. So when you go higher in the LSTM layers, the hidden layer, the hidden layer would represent more of the sentence. So it's useful for getting higher level semantics. This seems interesting, but it would seem more interesting to see how it pans out with more than 2 layers of network. Yep. I'm not sure if anyone has done that. Okay, maybe that's ULM fit. I don't know. Okay, then came ULM fit. So yeah, people who have done FastAI would be familiar with this. So this was by Jeremy Howard and Sebastian Ruder. So it's the same general idea of transferring NLM knowledge here applied to text classification. So ULM fit is applied, is done for text classification. Source label dataset, source model, and then you fine tune it to the target label dataset. We'll see about that. So these are the steps in ULM fit. You train the language model on big general domain corpus using a bi-language model. So you train the language model on a huge amount of data. The one that we saw, the billion words or something like that. And then you tune that language model on the text that you have as part of your current task. So if you have some kind of tweet classification, you just tune your language model to all the tweets that you have. So that's how you tune your language model. And then the third step is you freeze, or you can just ignore that softmax layer which predicts the next word. You freeze that part and you attach a class prediction layer at the end. So this could be positive, negative, or yeah, something like that, some text classification outputs. So yeah, this is the concept of ULM fit. It's not that complicated. So one thing that looked weird here is maybe he just did for simplicity. This looks like a traditional feed forward network, which I'm almost sure it is not. It's a LSTM model. So I'm not sure why he represents it by feed forward network here. Does anyone know? Okay. Yep. Okay. I mean, I guess it's just for simplicity that he shows this diagram, but it should actually be an LSTM. It should actually be LSTM layers. It's not. Should not be the dense networks over here. So ULM fit emphasizes on reasonable size 1 GPU language model. It's not a really big model. And Jeremy, as you know, introduces lots of small tricks to make his model really good at training. So different per layer learning rates. I forgot what this is called. I think it's different discriminative layer training, I think. So each layer has its own learning rates. Each layer group has its own learning rate. And slanted triangular learning rate. I think this is the one cycle policy, something like that. I'm not sure. So these are small tricks that Jeremy added to make the training of ULM fit better. And gradual layer unfreezing. Yeah, so even when you fine tune it, you don't just let all the layers weights get modified. You gradually unfreeze from the top and let the weights modify, because the last layers have to get, the last layer weights are the one that needs to be changed the most. So you gradually unfreeze them and you fine tune them. Classify using concatenation. Okay. Okay, I think the final classification is done using concatenation. Concatenate the hidden state and a max pool and mean pool of the hidden state. Okay. So ULM fit performance gives, so this is the error rate on IMDb dataset. It has given significant improvement, and on the TREC6, again, pretty good improvement on the error rate. Yep. And so this diagram shows the power of transfer learning. So if you train your ULM fit model from scratch, that is, if you do not train the language model on a huge corpus, instead you just train it on the data set that you have. Suppose you have a tweet classification data set, you just train it on the tweets that you have. It takes a lot of training examples to achieve a decent validation error rate. And if you did supervised if you did supervised supervised ULM fit, that is, you trained it on a huge corpus and then you trained it on the task, you can achieve the same performance at much fewer number of training examples. Yeah, like, and this is logarithmic scale, so it doesn't really show how better these two are. So what it does in 20,000 you achieve in 2000. That's an order of magnitude lesser. And if you, so this green one is if you fine tune the language model as well on your data set. So first you train the language model on a huge corpus and then you fine tune it on fine tune the language model on your current data set, and then you do the task prediction. That gives you even better validation error rate. So if you're using ULM fit, it's good to follow the 3-step process that we saw here. Okay. Yeah, so this shows how things have started getting bigger and bigger. ULM fit trained in 1 GPU day. The compute requires is really high. GPT is 240 GPU days. So this is the original GPT. BERT 320. So BERT was trained by Google, so they use TPU. 256 TPU days, 322 60 GPU days. GPT-2 2048 TPU days. Yep. So training of these huge models is something that only the huge companies can afford. That's how it is now. And GPT-3 is, as you know, it's really huge. It has like 175 billion parameters, and yep, takes a long time to train. It's very expensive to train, millions. And so yeah, this is I don't think there's any need to see this. I mean, all of you have seen what GPT-3 is capable of. So this was what GPT-2 did. It generated a really coherent interesting story when it was given this prompt. Yeah. And something interesting that I heard in a webinar yesterday about GPT-3. So all of these language models are trained to get the syntax right. So it looks really readable. So the syntax is kind of your objective. It has to look readable, but true progress is when it actually gives you something that's sensible to the question asked, when it's actually a fact, or something like that. The focus right now is to just get really coherent sentences. which is very creative and fun to read, but I don't see any really good use of these type of language models. Yep, and these were all the fear mongering that was done after the release of the model. Must be locked up for the good of humanity. Yep. All of these models are so after ULM fit, it was the beginning of transformers. Yep, so all of these models are just transformers. They do not have any RNNs or LSTMs in them. So the main motivation for transformers is that RNNs are not parallelizable. They are inherently sequential. So as I said earlier, the hidden state gets updated every time you see a new word. So it is sequential in its nature. Only when you see the first K words, you can look at the K plus 1th word. So it is not conducive to parallelization, or so you can't really make good use of your GPUs. And so yeah, despite GRUs and LSTMs, RNNs still need attention mechanism to deal with long range dependencies. So as we saw in an earlier lecture, attention is still used in these sequence models, in these LSTMs and RNNs, to deal with long range dependencies. Path length between states grow with sequence otherwise. Yeah. So so if a word is really far away in the sentence, it is difficult to get that dependency. So that's where attention helps in LSTMs and RNNs. But if attention gives us access to any state, maybe we can just use attention and don't need the RNN. So this is what the paper "Attention is All You Need" suggests. We can get rid of RNNs and just use attention, because it gives us access to all the states that we need. So this is the "Attention is All You Need" paper, which introduced transformer layers. So transformer layers, the main contribution is that it got rid of RNNs and LSTMs, and it just kept attention all over. I think the next lecture covers this paper in detail. The actual author of this paper, Ashish Vaswani, is the lecturer in the, he takes the lecture in the next video. But yeah. So this is non-recurrent sequence to sequence encoder decoder model. So there are no recurrent steps in the whole of this transformer model. So initially the transformer was trained on machine translation with parallel corpus. So we have already seen about translation stuff. So you have, suppose you're translating English to French, you have like, you may be having like a million English sentences and the equivalent sentences in French. So that's what a parallel corpus is. So this was the original task that the transformer was trained on, and it gave better results than the state of the art at that time. Predict each translated word. Final cost error function is standard cross entropy error on top of softmax classifier. Yeah, so obviously when you translate, your task is to just predict the next French word. So you have a softmax at the end to predict what is the next word. Right. And yeah, this is a really good blog to understand transformers. This is the annotated transformer. It has code as well as explanation together in the blog. Yep. First, for now, let's define the basic building blocks of transformer networks. First, new attention layers. Okay. So this is the attention concept that's used in transformers. So the attention that's used in transformers is dot product attention. So attention, the reason for its use is you're just trying to see which words should I pay attention to. Like so the purpose of self attention is to produce increasingly better representations for my words, and I would do that by looking at, for each word I should see what other words in my sentence are relevant, are important, and I improve my representation by considering all of the words in the sentence that are important. That's the basic concept of self attention. So the way it's done is yeah, all of this would be explained in the next lecture, but I'll go through it really quickly. So you have a query, key, and value. So yeah, these are all. So query, key, and value are just abstractions or projections of the words that you're dealing with. So query key values are all query key values and output are all vectors, and so the importance of each word to the current word under consideration is calculated by taking q into k. So each word has its own projections, which are query, key, and value. And the importance of the ith word with my current word, I calculated by using this score, that's q into k. So this gives me an idea of how important the ith word is to my current word under consideration, and you use the values to get the actual and these are the weights, and you multiply these weights with each value vector to get the new representation. So actually there comes a softmax in between to scale it, but yeah, that's the main concept of it. And yeah, there's an interesting picture that I saw in a video which explains it really well. Yeah. So this kind of explains the whole concept of query key value really well. We can just read this. Self attention. The query is a representation of the current word used to score against all other words using their keys. We only care about the query of the token we are currently processing. So each word has, like I said, projections which are query, key, and value. And so these words, query, key, and value, are taken from databases, from the world of databases. So for each word under consideration, I take its query vector, and then let's just read this. Key vectors are like labels for all words in the segment. So you can think of the key value concept as well. So key vectors are like labels for all words in the segment. They are what we match against in our search for relevant words. Yep. So key is what we match against for our search for relevant words, in our search for relevant words. So I take my query and then I match it with all of the keys. And the way you match it is dot product. And higher the dot product, more the relevancy of each word with the current word that I'm having. Value vectors are actual word representations once we've scored how relevant each word is. And these are the values that we add up to represent the current word. So I take this query, I match it up against each key, and then now I get weights for each of the words, and I multiply that weight. The weight represents the relevancy, and I multiply it with the values, and I get a new aggregated representation for my current word. So that's how self-attention works. I'm just creating better representation for my current word by looking at all words in my sentence. Yeah, yep, that's it. Okay, going back
So
to. Mhm.
so you're really updating as you're training. You're updating value. Is that true?
So yeah, there's some things I missed out, which I think would be explained in the next lecture. Just give me a sec. So like I said earlier, in self-attention, all you have are the initial word embeddings. So all you have are these input embeddings, right? And then we make three abstractions or three projections of that input embedding into query, key, and value. And the way we do that is we have three matrices which are WQ, WK, WV. Okay. So you have an initial, so suppose you have two words, thinking machines, and each has its embedding X1, X2. And now you want to get the query, key, and value for each of these words. You achieve that, you do that by multiplying X1 with WQ, and you get Q1. X1 with WK, you get K1, X1 with WV, you get V1. So this is the query, key, and value for thinking. So these are just three projections of my word at hand. And these projections are, or these abstract, and the way the reason we have this is these are abstractions that are useful for calculating and thinking about attention. They just help us do attention in an easier way, and they help us even think about attention in a more intuitive way. So these matrices are the ones that are being trained. These WK, Q, WK, WV are randomly initialized. And when you train the whole network, these three matrices get trained. And once it gets trained, you can notice that the words it pay attention to make good sense. Like you take a trained transformer and you see something like this. So when you made a new representation for the word it would have high weightage to the word the animal, because it is a pronoun that refers to animal. So these are the kind of concepts that you can see when you do attention. I hope that helped.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the next lecture should help more in this aspect. I think he skipped this slide. Yeah, this is just the attention score. Okay, yeah, I think all of these would be covered in the next lecture. And then there's a scaling that's done for stability. You just divide the softmax, just divide the score that you get by root of the word dimension. It's just for numerical stability. And in self-attention, the query, key, and value are all derived from the same word. Like you could do it in the same, you could just take the same QKV, but the way it's actually done is, in the original transformer, the way it's done is you have matrices that give you Q, K, and V from the same embedding. And the other type of attention, again, this is something that would be covered, is the encoder decoder attention. So this attention that you see here is not self-attention. The query comes from the target. So this would be your French sentence word, and the key value comes from the encoder output. So when I'm trying to predict my next French word, which English word representation should I pay attention to? So this is an encoder decoder attention, and these attentions are all self attentions. Okay. Yep. And then there's multi-head attention. So multi-head attention is just attention done parallelly. So you would have, so suppose you have 8 heads, you have 8 different queries for the same word, 8 different keys for the same word, 8 different values for the same word. The reason we do this is we want different types of attentions. We want different types of attentions to be done. So an example that he talks about in the lecture is, so so in dependency parsing we have these concepts of head and dependent, I think. So maybe one type of attention would be where the word pays high attention to its head, and another one would be where the word pays more attention to the dependent word, and another one would be where the pronouns might be paying attention to its the actual noun it's referring to. So we have multi-head attention because we want different types of attentions to be covered. Like, yeah, that's the main concept of why we need multi-head attention. Yes. Okay. Yeah. And we just, so the way we do this is we just split and then into 8 parts, and then we concatenate them. So that's how we do multi-head attention. Okay. So this is the complete transformer block. So the output that comes out of multi-head attention, we add it with the main input. So the reason we do this is, so this is a, I'm not sure what it's called. It's a residual connection. The reason we do this is so that your gradients don't diminish. So what this skip connection helps you in is it allows the gradients to flow more freely to your input. So it allows the gradients to, I mean, so it prevents the gradients at this region to become really, really small. That's why this skip connection is done. And and then there's a layer norm on top of that. So X plus sublayer X, we apply layer norm on top of that. So layer norm is slightly different from batch norm. Maybe you can look at that quickly. I have it open. So I'll just explain it quickly. In batch norm, suppose you have a layer in batch norm, what you do is you normalize it by looking at the values for an entire batch. And what you do in layer normalization is, so that for batch norm is for each node, you normalize it by looking at the values of that node that it saw for the entire batch. Whereas in layer normalization, you just look at one layer, and if that layer has like 10 nodes, you normalize it across that layer, as opposed to doing it for a batch. I hope that made sense. The main advantage is that unlike batch normalization, layer normalization performs exactly the same computation at training, at test and test times. So yeah, so in batch normalization, it depends on the batch size, it depends on the batch it sees. Whereas for layer normalization, the only thing the only thing that matters is your layer node values. So the normalization is the same every time. And it's also straightforward to apply to recurrent neural networks by computing the normalization statistics separately at each time step. Yeah. So yeah, it's apparently batch norm is complicated to apply to RNNs, and it's much easier with layer norm. Okay. Yep. Going back. So we use layer norm on the output that we get from attention. Okay. Actual word representations are byte pair encoding. Yep. So we saw about byte pair encodings last time, which are like the subword tokenization concept. So they are not actual words; they could be parts of words. And then there is positional encoding. Again, he does not talk about this. This will be covered in the next lecture. So briefly, positional encoding is just an encoding that's added to the word embedding, which gives the model some information about the word location. Yep, that's simply what positional encoding is. You just add an encoding that represents the location of the words, because otherwise the model would have not have an idea of where the word actually is in relation to the other words. So this whole thing is the encoder part. Yeah, and this whole thing is repeated 6 times in the original transformer paper. In BERT base, which has very similar architecture, it has 12 layers, and in BERT large there are 24. Okay, so the output from this would go to the next transformer block. Okay, this so this is how attention is, I mean, what you see when you visualize attention. So this is in the layer 5. Words start to pay attention to other words in sensible ways. So this is a sentence, and the word making pays more attention to more difficult. I guess that makes sense, since you're making it more difficult. And making would pay high attention to itself, and that's expected. Yeah, so if you try to read and the visualization of attention, you can see that it does it in sensible ways. And then there's implicit anaphora resolution. I think this is the same as co-reference resolution. Yep. So what they have done here is they've taken the 5th layer and the attention heads 5 and 6. So so this is why multi-head attention is important. So in one of the attention heads, the word it's paid high attention to law, because it's refers to law, the law. And the 6th attention head paid more attention to application. I think application is the modifier of its, I think. So that's why multi-head attention helps, because it can pay attention to many things. Note that the attentions are very sharp for this word. Transformer decoder. Okay, this is the decoder part of it. Masked decoder, self-attention on previously generated outputs. Yeah, so in the self-attention for the decoder, all of the next words are masked. because you don't want it to see the actual word that's being predicted at the current step. And yeah, that's what happens in multi-head attention. It's the same as the multi-head attention that you see in the encoder, except that so if you're trying to do attention for word 1, all of the words from 2 and beyond are masked out. And if you're trying to get the representation for word 2, everything from 3 would be masked out. You're not allowed to pay attention to the future words. So that's the difference between the attention that you see in the decoder and the one you see in the encoder. And the encoder decoder attention, we have already talked about that, where queries come from the previous decoder layer and keys and values come from the output of encoder. That makes sense. Yep, like I said previously, if you're trying to predict the suppose you're having English to French task and you're trying to predict the nth French word, and you can see which English words in my whole sentence should I pay attention to while predicting that particular French word. That's where the encoder decoder attention helps. This is similar to what we saw in LSTM, I think. Yeah. Blocks repeated 6 times also. Yep. The decoder is also repeated. Tips and tricks of transformer. Yep, it uses byte pair encodings. Yep, these would be explained in later lectures. I don't know what this is. Adam optimizer. Yep, these things would be explained in the transformer lecture. Okay. Use of transformers is spreading, but they are hard to optimize, and unlike LSTMs, don't usually just work out of the box, and they don't play well yet with other building blocks. Okay. So these are the results for machine translation. The blue score in English to German improved considerably from the previous convolutional sequence to sequence ensemble, and even in the English to French. And yeah, and the training cost is also considerably lesser compared to all of these. Okay. Experimental results for parsing. Okay. I'm not sure what type of parsing is this one. Okay, now we come to BERT. BERT is bidirectional encoder representations from transformers. So BERT is an encoder, as it says in the title. So it just has the encoder part of this model. It does not have a decoder. We are not trying to predict sentences, or we are not trying to translate or anything like that. It's not a sequence to sequence model. It's just an encoder model. You just get good representations or encodings for the sentence. So yeah, language models use only left context or right context, but language understanding is bidirectional. So, yeah, so the traditional left to right language models, as we've seen earlier, use only left context, or if it's a right to left language model, it uses right context. But for good understanding, bidirectionality is required. So suppose you want to find out if a word is an entity, it's always good if you look at left and right. Only the left context might be insufficient. So even, I mean, this is generalizable to all tasks. Bidirectionality always helps. So why are LMs unidirectional? I think that's obvious because we don't want to see the word we are trying to predict. Yep, that's pretty obvious. Unidirectional context build representation incrementally. That's what we have seen. The representation, the hidden state gets updated every time it sees a new word. Bidirectional context is not good because the words can see themselves. So that's not possible for a traditional language model. So what they did in BERT, what Jacob Devlin and the others did was they introduced a new type of task which is called masked language modeling. So instead of just trying to predict the next word by seeing the previous words, what they did was they masked out k percentage of the input words and then they predict the masked words. So they take a sentence, they mask out 15% of the words. I think that's 1 in 7 words. And then now they can predict the masked word by using words from the left and the right. So yeah, so this is how you can, and this is ultimately how they build bidirectional contextual embeddings. Yeah, so this is the task basically. They mask out 15% of the words and then they predict that masked word. Too little masking, too expensive to train. So if you just mask very few sentences, then you would need lot of sentences and lot of training to actually build decent representations. And if you have too much masking, you obviously won't get good enough context to predict that masked word. So the magic number they came up with is 15%. Yeah, so OpenAI GPT is unidirectional, so it does not have bidirectional context. Elmo is not bidirectional in the true sense because it has a left to right model separately and a right to left separate, and you just concatenate it. So at no point of time you're just looking at context from both sides. So it's not really bidirectional. Whereas BERT, you're just trying to predict a masked word and you are allowing it to pay attention to all words in your sentence. So it is bidirectional. It is truly bidirectional. And so they have two tasks in BERT. The next task is next sentence prediction. And the reason for this is the reason for this is given here. To learn relationships between sentences, predict whether sentence B is actual sentence that precedes sentence A or random sentence. So in a lot of tasks, it is not just important to look at individual word representations. Suppose you have a natural language inference task like this, where you have two sentences and maybe you want to predict entailment or contradiction or something like that. So you want to see relationships between sentences. So it's not important to just look at a sentence and form representations by looking at other words. You also want to look at relationships between sentences. And that is achieved by this task that BERT introduced. So this task is basically you feed it two sentences and the label is you want to predict whether the second sentence follows the first sentence or the second sentence does not follow. The man went to the store, he bought a gallon of milk. So this the sentence B naturally follows the sentence A. The man went to the store, penguins are flightless, obviously not. So this would be labeled as not next sentence. So training on a task like this would help BERT learn about relationships between sentences. And it is this task that ultimately helps BERT in tasks like natural language inference tasks. Yep. So BERT sentence pair encoding. So that you have the token embeddings, which are your word piece embeddings, and you add it with the position embeddings that we talked about earlier, which give an idea to the model of the relative location of the words, and then you have sentence embeddings. So in BERT, you input 2 sentences at a time. If you don't have the second sentence, you can still do it, but you can just leave it blank. So what the sentence embedding does is you are just telling BERT that this token is part of the first sentence, this token is part of the second sentence. That's all it is. Segment embeddings just tell which sentence it represents. Okay, transformer encoder. Yep. So like I said earlier, BERT model just has transformer encoder. Self-attention, no locality bias. No locality bias. Yep, because it's allowed to pay attention to words that are anywhere in the sentence. So there is no locality bias, which is a problem in your normal RNNs and LSTMs. Long distance context has equal opportunity. So so even if a word is far away or close to it, all of the words have equal opportunity. So long dependence relations are much easier on BERT, on transformers. Single multiplication per layer efficiency on GPU TP. Yeah, it is parallelizable, so it's efficient. Train on Wikipedia plus book corpus. 2 model sizes, like I said earlier, there's 12 layer, 768 dimension and 12 attention heads, and there's 24 layer, 1024 hidden and 16 attention heads trained on TPU. And then you fine tune it on any task that you have. So in the actual BERT pre-training, you have the masked language modeling where you mask out words and you predict that word. And then you have the next sentence prediction task. And once you pre-train it, you can just modify it for the classifier that you have, for classifying task that you have. For example, if you have some kind of tweet classification, you can just take the output of the CLS token and then you have a simple positive negative. And if you have a squad which is a question answering, you can just use the last layer to predict the start of the span of your sentence and the end of the span of your sentence. So there are, I mean, even this is not as easy. A lot of details are given in the BERT paper. You can read on that. BERT results on GLUE tasks. So GLUE is the benchmark which has a bunch of tasks like NLI, NER, classification. GLUE is dominated by natural language inference tasks, but also has sentence similarity and sentiment. Multi NLI. So this is a contradiction entailment type of task. The premise is that hills and mountains are especially sanctified in Jainism. Jainism hates nature. This is a contradiction. So BERT does really well on this type of inference tasks. This is a sentence acceptability task, I think. The wagon rumbled on the road, acceptable. The car honked down the road, unacceptable. I guess this is wrong it does seem right to me. But okay, honk down the road is wrong, I guess. Okay. BERT results on GLUE tasks. Yep, it gives really good results, improvements over GPT. So as we've seen before, GPT is unidirectional, so it is expected that it would give worse results. The improvement is quite drastic, I mean, huge in certain tasks. And one more thing to notice, BERT base is approximately the same size, the same number of parameters as the original GPT. So it helps us easily compare the improvement that BERT gives. There are huge jumps in quite a few of the tasks. And this is the NER as of 2019. So this is obviously changed now. BERT large is 92.8, 2018, sorry. Flare is 93.0, but this has changed now. Okay. Squad. Yep, it is dominated by BERT. Even now it's dominated by BERT family models. Squad 2. Yep, dominated by BERT. Effect of pre-training task. BERT base. Okay, what they did here was they saw what is they're trying to see what is the actual benefit of using next sentence prediction task. Yep, they were just seeing the benefits of each pre-training tasks that were done in BERT. So the normal BERT base gives you the highest results, and if you avoid next sentence prediction task, it gives you a considerable drop in the accuracy. Okay. Size matters. Going from the BERT large gives much better results than BERT base. Improvements have not yet asymptoted. Okay, yeah, it has not peaked in a way. You can still go on. Yep, that's the end of this lecture. Okay, anybody have any questions? Yep, most of these models have the word BERT in them, but I'm not sure what the actual difference is. Yep, any questions, or we can end.
Sorry, I have like side question. You mentioned that you listened to the GPT-3 presentation. Like, would you recommend it? Is it something you can share?
It was just a webinar. It was just a meetup that I came across. I don't think there's a recording of it. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
It's just one of those meetups that you see on meetup.com. I just attended that. And something that I can recommend is I had posted this in one of the other Slack channels. So this guy codes transformers from scratch. This is slightly easier to comprehend than the annotated transformer blog that was mentioned in the lecture. I found this really hard to understand most of the things. I mean, I didn't really try, but it seemed very daunting. But this video, I mean, if you have understood transformers good and you just want to try out the coding part and understand it in more depth, then this video is really good. He doesn't explain anything in depth, but to understand the code part of it, how it's implemented, he does it pretty decently. I can save it, send it in the chat. Okay, I can't see the chat. I'll send it later on. It's PyTorch transformers from scratch by Aladdin Person. Yep. Any other questions?